Hi everyone! With Halloween fast approaching, I wanted to show some of the colors that I had and how to make them a little bit more vibrant or colorful and use them for the perfect colors for Halloween. So here I've got some that I just have in my cabinet. These are some of the standard colors that came in a box set that I have. I have Chef Master and AmeriColor, and I use both brands. I really like them both. And so I'll show you a couple of tricks when you're coloring your icing about how much icing you need for how many drops of color and so on. So here's leaf green, one of my most standard green colors that I have. So I'm starting with a few good drops, 3 drops about here, and I've got about a cup of icing here. And you can see in the beginning it looks very intense, but as I mix it in, you want to make sure you always mix your icing in thoroughly because you want to get all that color off, either on the spatula or sometimes it gets stuck kind of in the side of the bowl. And you can see that it's not actually as intense as it seemed at first. So I'm going to add a couple more drops here. And again, I usually do a few drops at a time. And once you decorate cookies a lot, you'll kind of have an idea of how much icing you have, how many drops you need to start. But I always like to go lighter and then add more if I need to, because if it goes too dark, then you have to add more white icing to lighten it up. So here we can go and do a little swatch here, and it usually dries a little bit darker than it is. So if you've mixed in some, just stop shy of what the color you want, and then you'll get a nice vibrant color. So I've got a pumpkin cookie here, and I'm going to use my green to make a Frankenstein pumpkin. I love this kind of design to turn one shape into multiple different designs. I know a lot of people don't have different colors, so it's nice when you can find one that you can use for multiple purposes. And so this is green. Another trick I like to do with greens is add a little bit of lemon yellow. Lemon yellow is a really bright, vibrant color, and it sometimes just livens up the green if you have a kind of darker green or you just need a little bit more of a bright color to come through. So here I've outlined my pumpkin cookie in 3 separate sections. I use my outline consistency, and then I went ahead and did a squiggle, again with that same consistency in the middle. And the reason I do this is to prevent cratering. So sometimes the icing will indent in the middle, especially if it's a kind of longer section or it's a smaller section. And so this just gives a little bit of support to the icing. And then I just flood right over top. You can let that section dry if you'd like. I prefer to just do it right away and flood on top. I don't like to let it dry just because sometimes it breaks off and I have little pieces of dry icing floating in my flood. So that's just my preference. So again, I'm going to do the squiggle with my outline consistency, and you can tell this is outline icing, and that means it's thicker icing because it's staying in the same shape that I've piped it in. So you can see my flood kind of melts as it goes around and it comes together, but those squiggles that I did, that's that thicker icing. It's keeping its shape. That means that it's outline icing, and that's the same border that I've put around my cookie. And that will just keep all the flood icing in. So this is what you use when you use 2 consistencies. It means you have a thicker icing and a thinner one. I personally think it's faster doing it this way than trying to get the perfect consistency for both and using the same icing. And I tend to, if I use one consistency, it kind of goes over the edges of the cookie. So I really like using 2. I feel like I can go faster because my flood icing can be a little bit looser, and therefore it kind of can pipe faster and it will just melt together. I don't really need to use my scribe. It kind of perfectly goes once I'm done piping. For these edges that are really close to another section of icing, you can see I'm taking my time and I'm just kind of letting the icing do the work. I'm putting pressure on my bag and so that the icing goes up against the side. If you try to get the tip right up against it, it kind of gives you a wiggly line. So I sort of take my time around the edges and any borders that I have. And then in the inside, I can be a little bit more free with it. And you can see I'm wiggling my bag when I'm piping sometimes. That way, just to smooth out the icing as we go. So I usually let these dry. It depends how warm your place is, if it's humid, and so on. If you have a fan that helps dry, I love using my dehydrator. It really speeds up the process and it lets the cookies kind of crust over. So they're not 100% dry. However, it's dry enough for me to pipe another layer without ruining the icing underneath. So here I'm just using my black icing and I'm piping my outline here. And we're just going to give them a little bit of hair. And black icing is a little bit tricky because you want it intense and it takes a lot of color. So some people think that gel colors, they're more intense, which they are. You can't use the liquid colors from the grocery store to get these vibrant colors, but for black, it's a little bit tricky, so you want to let it sit for a little bit. So I usually do my black first sometimes, and then I'll do all my other colors. Then when I come back, it's had time to develop a little bit, and it tends to darken and deepen. And remember, again, with black icing as well, as it dries on the cookie, it will get a little bit darker. So you don't have to go all the way, super black. If you can't get there, it's okay. It will darken a bit when it dries. And then I'm letting my outline dry. I like to keep my outline dry for the hair and then move on to a few other steps just to give it a few minutes. That way it just holds its shape better. So I've moved on to the eyes in different sections so that I can kind of not stop and wait in between cookies. I can do one section, move on to another, and I can go back to the other one. So I've just added some eyes here, and I'm going to do a mouth in black as well. And of course, we got to give him a scar here. So again, I'm using my outline consistency for all these little details. For the eyes as well, I've used an outline consistency, and I've kind of shaken my bag or wiggled my bag as I'm piping, and that kind of jiggles the icing. And when you jiggle icing, it tends to smooth itself over. These are great, easy ways to make eyes, and you just pipe in one spot, let the icing kind of build, shake it up a bit. You can use your scribe to smooth it out, and then you just put your kind of piping bag back in there with the black, and you just make some dots in there for the googly eyes. And then here for the teeth, the same thing. I'm using my white outline icing, and I'm just going to kind of make a sort of rectangular square shape. And I'm just going slow. And again, I'm not using outline and then filling in with flood. It's just too small of an area. So I'm just going to do it with my outline, and I'm going to fix it up with my scribe. So I like to make my outline thicker, but not too thick where I can't smooth it out. So I usually have in my head, or I'll design the process, kind of go through the steps and see how thick do I need my icing. If I need these kind of eyes and little things that I may need to smooth out slightly, they're kind of too small details to have flat icing. So I'll use my thicker icing, my outline, and I will smooth it out. So I don't want to make it super thick where I can't smooth it out at all. Now for the hair, we're going back and flooding it. I didn't do a squiggle this time because I have that base layer of icing that isn't fully dry. It's just crusted over. This helps prevent craters as well. So you could do a squiggle if you're not sure, but using my dehydrator to dry this and it being piped on kind of a semi-wet layer of icing, it usually doesn't crater in this case. Some people like to poke holes at this point underneath their icing and then pipe on top, but I don't think it's necessary for me. This works really well. And there we go. We have a cute little Frankenstein pumpkin. So I'll show you another color. Violet is a really good color from Chef Master. I always find it really hard to get a good purple, and I really, really like this one. I've tried making my own purples with red and blue, and it does not work very well. So this is a really, really nice purple that I really like. So I always make sure I have a good one on hand. And again, I used a few drops here, you can see, and we're going to mix it in until it gets nice and incorporated. And again, sometimes you mix and you think everything's there, and then you kind of get a little patch that it hasn't been mixed in. So just make sure. And notice I'm mixing it where my icing is thick. I haven't thinned my icing down. So this is my outline consistency, and you can see it's a little bit thick. It's holding its shape. When I mix it, it's not really melting together. And the reason I want to mix it like this first with the color is because the color will thin it down a little bit, especially if you're doing a really dark color and you're adding a lot of color. So you want to make sure that you mix it thick and then you thin it down with water. If I thin it down with water and then I have my outline and my flood icing, then I have to mix the same color in both bowls. So this way I make sure that both my icings have the same color. And here we're going to make a like vampire type cookie. So I've just got a plaque cutter here that I'm using because I wanted something where I can put the top of his cape in the background. So this kind of worked out well. And so really you can take any shape, and if you are creative or just make it work sometimes, it works out really well. You don't need the cutters, all the fancy ones. They get expensive, especially if this is just a hobby you like to do a couple times a year. it's really hard to have a specific cutter only for one design. So it's nice to be able to use them for different occasions or different designs. And you can see how the purple turned out here. And again, now we're going to do the hair, and we've outlined it in black, and we've added our squiggle. And again, I've added my squiggle because this is the base of the cookie and there's nothing underneath here. If my icing was fully dry as well, I would still add a squiggle. It's only when your icing is slightly wet and like crusted over that you can get away with not doing that extra squiggle. Sometimes I'd rather do it safe than sorry because I don't know when it's going to crater and when it's not, and I'd rather just be safe and just do it. It takes 2 seconds. So that's another thing, like sometimes I'll just do them just in case. And again, I've got my outline consistency for these ears here, and I'm just smoothing it out with my scribe. My flood is just a little bit too loose to have, you know, if I put a little bit of flood, then it's just going to spread out too much. And anytime I'm doing long lines like the mouth here, I touch down and I go slowly lift the bag up and then touch down again to secure the icing, and that will give me a nice smooth line. And just take your time, go slow. This is me decorating in real time. And again, I've had a lot of experience. When I started, I was a lot slower. So just take your time, go slow. It will really, really help when you practice a little bit. You will get better. You will get a little bit faster, but decorating is still very slow. It's very time consuming. A lot of the videos are super sped up, and so it doesn't really give you the full kind of scope of how slow we actually go. So I'm just doing the cape here, and I did one side one way. I piped an outline and then I went back over it to make it thicker. And then for the second one, I'm kind of just doing a slow line, and I'm not lifting my bag up off the cookie to make it really thick. So when I keep my bag really close, it kind of spreads the icing out a bit and makes a thicker line. It's not as straight necessarily, but there's different ways of doing things. It just shows you that some techniques work better for some people, others for others. So whatever works for you and whatever you can make, you know, gives you the best results, go for it. Again, we're doing those eyes, and I'm just keeping the piping bag in the same spot, and I'm just kind of jiggling it ever so slightly, and then I go in with my scribe to kind of smooth it out. And then again, we're going in with my outline black, and I'm just kind of putting it right at the tip there and just shoving that icing right into those eyes kind of thing. And it's nice and smooth, and it's a flat eye. So the black is not sitting on top. It's actually kind of in the icing that's around it, in the white icing. And this gives us a nice kind of smooth eye and makes them nice and pop out off the cookie. You want to do that when your white icing is still wet, and put the black on top so that it kind of goes right inside of it. Then we're just going to add a little button nose here. And that is, again, my outline consistency. So I'm just smoothing it out with a scribe. And I always have a damp paper towel beside me where I keep my piping bags. And I usually just wipe my scribe on it so I'm not mixing up the colors and everything. I added a little red dot here. This is going to be the middle of his bow tie. And then I'm just going to go in and add the teeth while the middle dot there dries a bit. So again, I tried to do different steps so that I'm not waiting, oh, I need this section to dry before I move on. So I tried to do as many different steps that are not interfering with each other. That way I can move on and kind of finish the cookie a little quicker. And here I have a little crater that ended up coming in my cape edge. So I'm just putting a little bit dab of icing in there. There's just a bubble that kind of burst and made a little tiny hole. It's not very visible, but I put a little bit of icing on the tip of my scribe just to fill it up. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill this with my red icing. And again, I want to make sure my black is a little bit dry. That way my icing doesn't melt into each other too much or kind of messes with the black and bleeds into it. And it also holds the shape really well, and it holds that icing in. I want to make sure the black border stands out quite a bit, so I don't want to pipe on top of it. Normally when I outline and I flood, then I want to flood on top of my outline, but in this case I want the black of the cape to be seen. And again, on the side I usually have my wet paper towels, and I'll fold them kind of sandwich my piping bag tips in between them so then they don't crust over. Because if you don't use the bag, the icing kind of hardens and it may crust over on your bag and then you get a little blockage. So I usually have them there and it works doubles as, to clean my scribe and so on. And again, for the bow tie, I'm just making a small little triangle shape out of the outline consistency and just kind of filling it up. If you make it really thin layer, it's hard to smooth out. So I add, like a little bit more of icing there, then I can play around with it. I can shape it with my scribe. I can pull the corners out to make them nice and pointy and kind of shape the bow tie as I need to. And there you have it. You have a great vampire cookie. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video and we'll see you in the next one. Happy Halloween!